So, X-Men are woke. It's kind of interesting idea. I see woke a lot different than I think a lot of people do. But I guess I could get into that later. John Byrne, artist and writer of X-Men, a while back, I think he's coming back. I'm not 100% sure, but I know he's been making tons of news outlets, to kind of, about him saying that it was never about racism and the X Men were never about racism and prejudice, and people always compare him to Martin Luther King as Professor X and Malcolm X as Magneto, and that was created by the fans. And I mean, technically, he's right. Fans said that. Stan Lee has never said that, but there was a time. Well, basically, Stan Lee, he okay, so he was getting tired of giving superheroes origins, so he just was like, I'm gonna have them born superheroes. That was the whole idea behind X Men. That was it, honestly. Um, and then it changed over time, and then he said he saw it, you know, mirroring the civil rights movement, and he's like, this is good. Let's go with this. So technically, no. When Stan Lee created it, it was just out of laziness. It wasn't like this is my goal or whatever. Even to the side of what Byron's saying, it wasn't his goal to do it like this. And I guess you could look. He compared Magneto to Hitler. He said was basically, which is odd because he was a Jew, but that comes later on. That wasn't during the first episodes. But in the beginning, he did, you know, hate people, wanted humans to be better. Um, there was he wanted to put fear in them. He wanted all these different things. Magneto was just a typical cookie cutter bad guy, but he did think mutants were higher and better. I don't see him as Hitler really, but whatever. Uh, it's all very funky, especially the woke idea coming up with it. Um, but let's just go to the basics. So X Men for me has always been about diversity, acceptance. There is a cool whole thing about the characters and all that stuff, but behind it all, I always thought it was about being different and acceptance. And really, where it all started, where they started focusing on, was Giant Size X Men. So people will probably put Giant Size X Men value and collectible wise like top five X Men things to have. Um, as far as story wise, I don't. I mean, I don't know where people put it. There's a lot better stories out there. Um, but I'll get to that with Claremont. But you have to remember with Giant Size X Men, they want a representation in Giant Size X Men. They got all these different nationalities on purpose. So go through your whole list: Colossus, Russian; Wolverine, Canadian; Storm, African; Banshee, Irish; everything. Everybody, they wanted them to be represented. So at that time, would we call it woke because we wanted people to feel like they could relate? I don't know because maybe it was always this way. And I've always argued that woke means now. Woke means what's going on, and when people use it and they don't like it, they're trying to shove agendas down our throat. Back then, they weren't. Other races weren't really accepted, and we started going through a movement where we were trying to make it clear that people that thought logically were like, we're accept. We accept people. We want to show this, and then the comics they went that way. Comics have always been a way to express what's going on with the world around us, and it just got to the part where Lin Win, who got introduced the X Men, the Giant Size X Men, made it very clear that he wanted them all represented. So, is that woke? Or at the time, if that happened now, would we be all upset and say this is woke? Because I always think it's just what's happening now, what's going on now. It's just different. But Chris Claremont, he's the one that took it over and just changed everything. Chris Claremont is probably the greatest writer of X Men, and if you want to argue with me, you can argue with me. It's not because of he focused so much on what we're arguing against today with Byron's comments, because some of it's true. Like he wasn't really Hitler, but he was a cookie cutter bad guy, and he hated everyone, and he thought they were better than mutants, or mutants were better than humans. Um, but Chris Claremont really, really, really leaned into it, and it became about racism, religious intolerance, discrimination, fear of outsiders. he really, 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 really got into it. And this is the version of the X Men that I grew up with, and I think most people grew up with, or around my age at least. And after that came everything else, the cartoons and things like that. But they all kind of followed the same story, you know, the alienation and all that. But at the same time, I understand where it all came from. Like I get it, because we did start to, in the beginning it wasn't intentional, right? It wasn't intentional. It was clearly just Stanley out of ideas. Clearly that's all it was. It was Stanley out of ideas, and he went with it, and he just went with the, you know, being different, kind of like, you know, and people, you know, Magneto thinking he's better than everyone, and X-Men were trying to say no, you know, they weren't. So with that being said, it changed. It's now a different way. Chris Claremont started it, and other writers have been behind it. I know one thing that I have it written down somewhere. It was Ann Nocenti. She was one of the editors, but she says, "Why are mutants feared while heroes with similar powers often aren't?" And I think that's kind of true, and I think that even happens with Superman. Even they look at him as an alien. The people that don't like Superman, they're like, "This guy's an alien. He doesn't belong here." And, you know, people that hate him, but, you know, for the most part, a lot of people like Superman, and they care about what he says. But her bringing up that argument kind of makes sense a little bit to what's going on. And the fact that Stan Lee, like, was quoted, like, saying how people compared it to the civil rights movement, and he liked the fact that it mirrored that. He said, you know, that was cool. That's him. You know, he accepted it later on. It wasn't something he created based off the whole Martin Luther King and the whole Malcolm X thing. But Chris Claremont made crazy things. Was it God loves man, man kills, or something? I can't remember the name of it. But that was very, very centered around prejudice and things like that. Like, it was crazy. Very, very crazy book, but it's held to be like one of the biggest stories. I believe it was started as a novel, to my knowledge. It's a iconic story that any X-Men fan should know. That God loves, man kills, I believe, or something like, I don't know why I can't figure it out. But other writers that, you know, I was looking right here, the best X-Men writers of all time, Scott Lobdell's Uncanny X-Men is better than he gets credit for. It was cool. I liked that storyline around then. Him and, like, I believe Fabian may be on the list. I'll check. But I know together they agreed, both writers have said that everyone experiences alienation, and that's what they wanted to kind of come across. And you could look at it as minorities, LGBTQ, but that's what they said. And people in those realms couldn't maybe relate to that. Now, did they intentionally say these people? No. But could those people relate to that? Sure. It's one of those things that I think that's up to interpretation as well. Jonathan Hickman, number 9. Ed Brubaker, number 5. Mike Carey, number... what is he, 5? 7. 6 is Fabian, and Fabian was the one too. Time of X-Men is 90s goodness, and this is the time I think a lot of people really got into it, and the loss of Warren's Adamantium, and the wedding of Cyclops and Jean Grey. A lot of big things happened with I'm sorry, we butchered his name, with Fabian. And it was just a different time, and he really rocked the whole idea of a lot of the discrimination and the alienation, I should say, you know, the being a cast out. He really focused on that, and you know, I think it just went further. Jason Aaron does a decent job. Rick Remender, oh god, I love Rick Remender's run of X-Force. Joe Kelly's up there. Grant Morrison, number 2. This is where it gets really crazy. Grant Morrison, number 2, voted on Comic Book Resources as one of the best writers. He heavily leaned into the concepts of prejudice and discrimination and bigotry. Um, Very civil rights movement, about identity, evolution, youth culture, fear of social change. All these things he really, really leaned to. If you read it, and it's actually a really great run. He made up some of the craziest mutants at that time, and a lot of them were hard to be accepted by their own mutant peers. They were freaks to even the mutants at times. A lot of bad bullying going on. There are some sad moments in it, and they look at Magneto a certain way. And what's crazy with the whole Magneto thing is, I think in the 80s is when they changed it to where he was Jewish, I believe, and so that kind of beats the whole Hitler thing out. But at the same time, you could relate Hitler to him in the first run because he was just an evil guy that believed his race was better, and wanted the other race gone. So I get that, but everyone heavily leaned into the Jewish aspect so much that it carried over to the movies a lot. Even with the first X1 to X3, he talks about his branding all the time. One of the greatest openings in the X-Men scene where he's getting pulled from his parents in the Holocaust. I'm sorry, at the concentration camp during the Holocaust. And then even to First Class, we see a lot of it when we started with that story, dealing with that. And I get it because it's kind of an easy way for characters that are already basically alienated then to relate it to bigotry. I get it and I understand it. I mean, Joss Whedon was really big on this as well, but everyone's not the biggest Joss Whedon fan right now. But this all, like, I don't know, it seemed like it was all about outsiders being able to relate. And even if that's from number 1 to whatever, to Giant Size X-Men, and then where it changed more and more, it was all about being able to relate to them. Even in the first ones, you could see that it was about, the core idea was Magneto, we're mutants, we're better than them. X-Men, we're mutants, and we're trying to show that we don't believe what he believes in. That's the core. It wasn't, civil rights. It wasn't what was going on. But people kind of write around what's going on in a way. But, Stan Lee never really came out and said that. Later on, he came out and said, yes, he sees it as a civil rights comparison, and he likes that. He enjoys that. So what it comes down to is Byron's not wrong. It's his opinion that you could see him as Hitler, and there's no facts that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby saw him as Hitler, but they just had their own ideas and they went with it, and it just got turned into everything. And it's just, the world now is just different. People call X-Men woke all the time. We had it with Morph change. We have it when gays are in it. I guess that counts as with Morph. Gays being in it, different races represented differently. You name it, they've done it, and they try to. And people think it's like a real big shock factor, I guess. But I think people are missing the big picture. Is it was always about telling stories of like prejudice, fear, acceptance. These were like the core things that was always about, and that theme really has never changed. I mean, it's always been the same. It's never been far off from those ideas. And again, with social media nowadays, the term woke is thrown around about everything. We cast a person as a gay character, or they make a gay character in a show, they make a trans character in the show. I think ultimately some writers just want everyone to feel welcome at the table. You can tell a story with just all straight white guys. I mean, you can. But I think some writers think like, hey, we're going to try to make this a little open to everybody. Just like I think with the Ghostbuster cartoon, they had one, I don't know if it was Extreme Ghostbusters. It was one of the kids. And they had a kid in a wheelchair be part of the team. Burger King had a little crew back in the day when I was young, and they had a kid in a wheelchair. So I think they wanted to show we're open to everybody. We're open even if you're handicapped. People do these things either PR-wise, or they just truly feel like, hey, this is what we feel and we want the audience to know at this time. So people putting like a trans character, a gay character, or even different race character, maybe race changing. I can understand if it really messes up the character being a different race, but sometimes it just doesn't matter. But for the most part, it's just like uh, it, it, it's just frustrating because there's more voices now in the community, at large, social media, and then in the comic book community, tons of fans are more out. They're public. The guy I hate at Cosmic Book News is like, "See, I told you it's about Hitler and this and stuff. None of that woke crap." I mean, back then, you could have went against Hitler and be called woke. I don't know, but it's not that. It was never painted that picture. That's what Byron thought, and that was his opinion. He's not technically wrong. I mean, he could think that way and think that's what it was from, but and all original or just from the origins, it was just Stanley being lazy, honestly. And then it evolved over time into what we have now, and it's what most people grew up with. No one really grew up with the beginning X-Men. People didn't flock to it. It wasn't popular. It just wasn't. Sad to say, back then X-Men was not what it is today. Because back then comics were different. And now they're used to make messages, and they're used to kind of show what's going around in the world, and reflect on that when they tell stories, and that's how they get lost stories out of this. Who's number one? Oh, Chris Claremont. He's the blueprint. Yeah, Chris Claremont is one of the biggest, I think, changes besides the giant size X-Men, where they created them all of different nationalities. Again, if that happened now, if they made a whole superhero team and everyone was represented, I think people would be mad. And especially if they did one gay guy, one trans, whatever. I think they would be upset, but I think back then they would have done the same thing. It wouldn't been any different than like now. It's just people get so upset now and they're all up in arms, and it's just represents differently. And they just X-Men writers have always explored, most of them, I should say, not all, the idea of being an outsider. And people all could relate with that. And like I said, I believe like Fabian said it too, like this idea, not so much prejudice, not so much racism, all that, but everyone has been alienated at some point in their life, and they know what it's like to not fit in. So maybe he didn't want to get political behind it. Maybe he didn't care about the politics behind it. But from what he believed, it was so much writing about being an outcast. So if people related to that, being in their own situation, being an outcast, their race, being an outcast, working somewhere, and you're the only minority feeling like a white, why am I saying white cast? Whatever. But even if you're a white guy working with a bunch of Mexicans, like at a construction site where they think it's like racism that only Mexicans work at construction sites or something like that, and that's a racist thought. And then like a white guy working there, then maybe he thinks he's gonna get picked on because of that. It's all about being seen differently and worrying about that. So with the X-Men, I just feel like it kind of over time just represented that. Like I said, it started with giant size X-Men, and then Chris Claremont just took it a whole nother level. He took it to a whole nother level to what we know, the X-Men and what they're for, and those ideas and stories have carried on. Lean into the Jewish aspect of Magneto. We lean into it in the media. So much as you want to say, oh, it's like Martin Luther King and it's like Malcolm X, it's not what they planned. You could look at that just like how John Byron's looking at it with Hitler or whatever he said. It just was upsetting to me that he kind of shut down the whole idea of what X-Men represented. And what they represented was about just being different more than anything. They weren't looking at an exact group or exact minority. It was basically like just looking at not being part of it, the world or whatever situation they're in. That's what X-Men was about. And I think we should all think about this when he does say things like, where it's not like this, not like that, cool. But from when I started reading, it was not maybe about certain things like Malcolm X or whatever people related to. it was about not being accepted for who you are, or what you live with, or what you're born with, or what the way you feel. Um, Even so much that, in the X-Men movies, they're looking for a cure for this, and if that happened nowadays with certain things, they would look for cures for it. Not to get too deep, but like, there are these gay camps where they think they can make people straight and all that. So it's like almost things reflect things that have always been going on. These aren't new things. It's not woke, where it's like this just happened. They're trying to be different. This has always been a thing. This has always been nothing new. And it kind of sucks because this is a debate that I hate always getting into. Anything about like wokeness or anything like that. It's just I just get irritated by the word woke. It's just one of those things that um, just doesn't. It just sounds like a trigger word. Both sides, either you're for it or against it. Um, and I'm mainly against it, so it's just trigger word. I think because woke just means now, in my opinion. You're just going off of what's going on right now, and you don't like it. You look at it. Some people look at it as an agenda, a way to just be different and be edgy. Then some people look at it as, well, they're just trying to show they accept everything. Um, they're welcoming all different types of people, whatever. So that's the weird thing, is people are really arguing about, is X-Men woke? So what you really could say is, no, in the beginning it wasn't woke at all. To an extent, it wasn't. It was just about people being different. Um, they're mutants. They didn't really lean into the whole idea of that, we want our rights and all this and that. It was Magneto thinking that mutants were better than everybody and they needed to get rid of the humans. He was kind of a cookie cutter bad guy. You could compare that to Hitler, I guess, but it's kind of weird with him being Jewish later on to have that comparison. Um, and sure, it didn't start like that, but did it evolve to this? Yes. Heavily, I keep saying, with giant size X-Men, it started a lot, showing that representing different races and nationalities, um, big time. People could look at that almost like stereotyping. Like, why do you think, Thunderbird looks like this? Indians all look like that? You could argue that. But that's when they were really making changes. And then Chris Claremont, one of the greatest writers, probably the greatest, they're voted number one, is the Blueprint, is what they call him, Chris Claremont. Um, he's the one that ran with it. And you have to remember, Stan Lee and others saw over this. So they could have chimed in and said, look, you're going too far with this, with fighting the bigotry, and mutants have rights too, and, them people out there protesting against them and hating mutants, and you're going too far. But no one did. I think people just accepted that he was kind of telling a story, and the story kind of was relatable to what people have gone through, no matter what you've gone through, far as like the big one, things like bigotry and racism and things like that. We all have seen it, regardless if you've been through it or not. But we've all gone through things that are like, oh, we've been alienated, and it doesn't feel good, and it sucks. But I mean, it's always kept the core message alive. The whole, like, it just evolved. Like, the message is there. This isn't nothing new. And Byron shaking it up a little bit with his opinion kind of made everyone get triggered with the woke word again, and even has me on the other side of me going, wait, it's more like this. But to be honest, it was just Stanley being lazy. And then it evolved into now a movement. So nowadays he's saying that they're doing too much and they're trying too hard. Yeah, they're. If you think that, sure, they started way back in the 70s, I believe, with Claremont, and moved on from there. Not in '63 when the X-Men were created, but this is why they've continued for like 60 years with that same ideology of being accepted, of being outcast, being feared for who they are. It kind of has shifted. No matter what he thought what the X-Men were, this is what they are now, and they have been for many years. And people get upset when, like I said, these different things get shoved in their face, they feel like. You can always not watch them or not read it. I know a lot of people, I remember like 5 years back or so, I had a friend that was like, they put a gay character in X-Men, they're trying to be too different, and I'm tired of it. And I'm just like, all right, it's fine. You don't feel that way. It doesn't bother me to read it. I'm not gonna freak out. people are just represented, and I think a lot of these writers just they may do it out of fear that people think that, oh, they're not um, doing enough for the whole community of comic readers, and that's why they're forced to do it. They feel like, and then some really just feel that way. I don't know. I can't speak for everyone. All I can do is tell you what other writers said when I was reading all these writers who are the best writers and what they thought of the X-Men. And that, like I said, the craziest one probably Chris Claremont kind of jump started. They call him the blueprint right here. But Grant Morrison really, 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 really leaned into it with the whole new X-Men. Just crazy amounts. And then like Magneto now falls into like this gray area. He's not what they represented in the first, run of X-Men. He's definitely a different, type of Magneto now. We get it, and he sees the parallels now, how they write him. He's not just this what they want to call Hitler type character, or even Malcolm X like character. He's a lot different now. He's evolved as well through time and through change. But like I said, my whole thing is, let's not go off this one guy's opinion. Have your own opinion. A lot of people do agree with him, and that's their opinion. They have a right to it. But I'm just going off the facts of what happened and the facts of why X-Men were created. Why Giant Size X-Men changed a lot. And it happened. Fact, it happened. Why Chris Claremont believed in showing things about prejudice, bigotry, all this. Chris Claremont decided to roll with it. Why after that, things did change with other writers. They followed that, creating Magneto being Jewish. And then the fact where we got Grant Morrison doing a lot with it. And then it goes further and it goes into the X-Men movies where they really do these stereotypes and racist type things in the movies. So this is what a lot of people see. And I don't know if like when Magneto got changed to a Jewish man, if people were like, this is woke, they're trying to make Jews relate to a character and he understands what it's like to be discriminated like us and like how mutants are. I don't know. Like I wasn't there at the time when they changed it. I was alive, but I wasn't reading it at the time. I don't know. There wasn't social media. That's the whole thing. There wasn't social media and articles we could go back and read people with their outrage about Magneto being Jewish. And then nowadays we could read if, oh, I don't like that he's in the middle, but I've never seen arguments really about Magneto being in a gray area. I think they just think he's one of the best. People put him up there, one of the best villains in comic book history. I think it's so much following his evolution. It's the biggest thing. And his evolution dealt with hating a type of people and not accepting him, to eventually seeing it and eventually coming to terms with it. And he got his own stories that don't follow whatever you want to say, like woke type things and stuff like that. But the fact that everyone's trying to just like blow it off, like, see, this is how it was and this wasn't what it's like. No, it wasn't. It just wasn't dealing with anything. And when it did, it started with different stories and moved on and to nowadays where we're at the movies with it and where the comics still are, where we learned that Iceman was gay and things like that. They're like, oh, they're trying to force it. I don't know. Maybe the writer thought it was a good idea. I think that was Bendis. Maybe he thought it was a good idea. Thought it was a good twist. I could get all into that comic. That comic was crazy, where they brought the old X-Men to the new X-Men timeline. It was nuts. But overall, I mean, I don't want to open up the discussion like, do you think it's okay to be like this or that? I just want to know, do you feel like the X-Men have evolved through time? That's probably my main question to everybody. Do you feel like the X-Men have changed from the beginning to a certain point and then kind of went with that and then kept going, and even now they still change things to accommodate outsider feeling and, not feeling quite, in with people and being left out? Like, it seems like they're still doing that same story from when they jump started it, like around, Giant Size X-Men. So I think that's the main thing to get from it, not so much get into the bigotry and Malcolm X and Hitler and all that. It's just, to me, I just would ask you guys, do you think X-Men has evolved into this? And if so, is it hurting things? Is it okay? Are we getting it shoved down our throat? Is it promising that they're open and to show everybody's represented? Where are we at with it, or do we just shut up and just read the comics and deal with what's in it? Do we just read the comic and whatever's in it, it's in it? You don't have to agree with it, don't have to hate it. You just read the comic for the comic, and characters are certain ways, and that's the way it is, and you just enjoy reading comics. Is that the way you want to be? So that's where I leave it at. I really do hope this gets some traction because I would love to have people's opinions. It was crazy, and I won't lie, it got me like going like, what the hell's the matter with Byron? Because I never heard the debate of Magneto being Hitler ever, so that kind of blew my mind. And then other outlets, and especially I hate that kind of cosmic book news, so that kind of like probably what made me go like, what? Because he was like, all you guys that think you're woke, and it's like, I think it's bigger than that. So then I was like, all right, let me put pen to pad and basically start thinking about this, and then look at the realization of, yeah, things are different now. Were they before? Not so much. Did they start getting changed? Yes. Really, really catching steam with Chris Claremont. But basically, I just want to know how everyone feels about evolution, and is it okay that it evolved, and it's okay that they use that symbolism for change and for acceptance, or would you rather just be out of the book and not read it? Or if it's in the book, you just shut up and read. That's kind of where we're all at, making those decisions. So just let me know what you think. Hopefully, like I said, get some traction and people can actually chime in and say something. Like, subscribe, share. See you guys.